All right, let's get ready to do a deep dive into a real arcade classic.
A true legend.
Yeah, Time Pilot.
Time Pilot, oh yeah.
Strap yourselves in, folks, because we're going to take a trip through time, just like in the game.
Looking at its development, gameplay, and impact.
We've got some interesting stuff to uncover, like, the designer kind of went rogue during development,
Yeah.
and there's actually a hidden level in one of the later versions.
Oh, intrigue right from the start.
Right. So first things first, Time Pilot. This is a multi-directional shooter that Konami released in 1982.
And what's so cool about Time Pilot, I think, is it takes this familiar formula, like the classic shoot-'em-up action,
Yeah.
but throws in time travel.
Exactly.
And that was just such a hook for players.
Oh, totally. So you're not just blasting enemy aircraft. You're doing it in like 5 distinct eras.
Yeah.
Right? You go from dogfighting biplanes in 1910
Yeah.
all the way to dodging UFOs in 2001.
It's like a history lesson with a joystick.
It really is. And speaking of joysticks, Time Pilot's controls, they were kind of unique and actually pretty challenging.
Definitely, because unlike so many other games where you can just like spin your ship on a dime,
Totally.
Time Pilot, your jet had a realistic turning radius.
Right.
So it really forces you to think ahead about your movements, to strategize, which added, I think, a whole other level of depth to the dogfighting.
It did. And, it's funny.
Yeah.
It's almost like the developers were saying to players like, hey, we're going to make you work for these victories.
Yeah, earn this. And that commitment to making it unique is also evident in the development of the game itself.
Oh, yeah.
The story behind Time Pilot is almost as exciting as the game itself.
Oh, really?
So Yoshiki Okamoto, the designer,
Okay.
he had his initial proposal rejected by his boss.
Really?
Yeah.
I got to hear this.
Okamoto was so determined to bring this game to life that he basically decided to play a little game himself.
Okay.
So he pretended to be working on a driving game,
Oh, wow.
but secretly was developing Time Pilot on the side.
Oh, my gosh. Talk about risk.
Right. Can you imagine the guts that took?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I'm just going to sneak this in.
That is a high-stakes gamble, but I guess fortune favors the bold, right?
It really does in this case, because Time Pilot wasn't just a hit.
Yeah.
It was a phenomenon.
That was huge.
It became the 5th highest grossing arcade game in Japan in 1982,
That's incredible.
which is no small feat.
Not at all.
And then it crossed the Pacific and took America by storm as well.
Yeah. Topped the charts in 83.
It did.
So it seemed like everybody was ready to hop in their own time machine.
They were ready to travel through time and shoot stuff.
Exactly. And, the reviewers at the time, they were raving about it.
They loved it.
They loved it, praising the controls, that challenge,
That time travel element.
that time travel.
Nobody had really seen that before.
Yeah, it really did stand out from all those other arcade shooters out there.
It really did.
It carved its own little niche.
And speaking of that time travel,
Yeah.
this is where things get really interesting. It's not just a cool visual, right?
Right.
The way they chose the eras in Time Pilot, I think, actually reflects some of the cultural anxieties and fascinations of the early 80s.
Okay, I'm listening.
So think about it. You start in 1910,
Okay.
dawn of aviation, right?
Yep.
Time of optimism and technological wonder.
Right.
Then you jump to 1940,
Mm-hmm.
World War II.
Oh, yeah.
This represents global conflict and the destructive power of technology.
Right. And then we jump to the 1970s, which had the Vietnam War and a lot of social upheaval.
Exactly. And then we land in the present of 1982,
Right.
where the Cold War is still very much a thing and the future just feels uncertain.
Yeah.
It's almost like a timeline of anxieties,
Yeah, it is. And then to top it all off, you've got the final level in 2001.
Right.
And you're facing off against UFOs.
And that's no coincidence either.
Oh, really?
Because
Okay.
back then, UFOs weren't just science fiction.
Right.
They were a cultural phenomenon tied to all this Cold War paranoia and just a fascination with space exploration.
Totally.
So it reflects this, wonder and fear
Yeah.
about what the future holds.
It really does.
Yeah.
So it's not just time travel.
No.
It's a commentary
It's a commentary.
on how, each generation kind of grapples with these unique sets of challenges and anxieties.
Exactly. And that's what makes Time Pilot so fascinating.
Yeah.
On the surface, it's pure arcade fun.
Totally.
But beneath that, there's this layer of social commentary
It is.
that just adds a surprising depth to the whole experience.
It's like the game is saying, hey, even though technology changes and times change,
Yeah.
humanity is kind of facing the same struggles.
It is. And the fact that the game loops, you constantly revisit these eras,
Right.
but with increasing difficulty,
Yeah.
really reinforces this cyclical view of history.
It does.
It's like we're destined to keep repeating these conflicts,
Wow.
just with, better weapons each time.
It's deep, man. I never
Yeah.
thought of it like that.
Yeah.
So we've got awesome gameplay. We've got clever commentary on history and culture.
Yeah.
But we can't forget about, like, the visuals.
Yes.
And the sounds
Sounds.
that really bring Time Pilot to life.
Yeah. And, they might look simple by today's standards,
Yeah.
but there's just a certain charm
There is.
to those, like, pixelated biplanes
Yeah.
and the blocky UFOs.
I love it. It's like a beautifully crafted retro tapestry.
It really is. And, within the limitations of the technology at the time,
Yeah.
they did a great job creating a sense of depth and movement.
They did, like the parallax scrolling.
Oh, yeah.
Like with the clouds and asteroids.
The clouds, yeah. That was really innovative for the time.
It was, and it really gave you that sense of depth,
It did. It made it feel more immersive.
Immersive, yeah.
Yeah.
And we got to mention those colors.
Oh, the colors.
So vibrant.
Each time period had its own palette.
Right.
Really helped you feel like you were traveling through time.
Oh, it totally did. Speaking of traveling through time,
Yeah.
we can't forget those iconic musical chimes every time you warp
Oh, I know.
to a new era.
They're so effective, and they're not even like complex melodies,
No,
but they just perfectly capture that feeling
they do.
of temporal displacement.
They totally do. And the sound design was awesome, too.
Oh, yeah.
The roar of the jet engine.
Yes.
Those staccato bursts of the enemy fire.
Satisfying.
Oh, and the explosion when you take down a mothership.
So good.
It just all added to that intensity.
It did. It really did. It's amazing that they could create such an engaging experience
Yeah.
with such limited technology.
Totally.
They really knew how to, make every pixel and sound effect count.
They did. Now, before we totally lose track of time here,
Okay.
let's talk about how Time Pilot made the leap
Yes.
from the arcade to home consoles.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Atari 2600 port.
Okay.
This was Time Pilot for the masses.
It was.
You got to put yourself back in 1983.
Yeah.
No fancy graphics. Just
yeah.
you, your Atari,
Yeah.
and a whole mess of biplanes.
Exactly.
Can you imagine?
It was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Because remember, home consoles were just starting to get popular.
Yeah.
And to have this arcade hit available at home, that was revolutionary.
It was. Now, I'm sure there were limitations, though, when it came to porting it.
Of course, there were some compromises.
Right.
The graphics were simplified.
Right.
Gameplay had to be adjusted, of course, for the Atari's capabilities.
Like the backgrounds.
Simpler, way less detailed.
Less detailed, yeah. And the number of enemies on screen at once was limited.
Right. But even with those limitations, I think they did a pretty good job of capturing that essence of Time Pilot.
Yeah, they did a fantastic job.
You still had the distinct time periods, the challenging enemies, and just that core addictive gameplay loop.
You still had it, And they even kept the parachuting pilots.
They did.
Those little guys you could snag.
Bonus points.
For
yeah.
bonus points, exactly. It's those little details
Yeah.
that make a game truly memorable. They do. So we've got a simplified version of Time Pilot.
Yeah.
But it's still got that, heart and soul of the arcade.
It does.
Did they make any other changes to the gameplay for the Atari?
One significant difference was they got rid of the preset enemy formations.
Oh, okay.
Because in the arcade, the enemies often flew in specific patterns,
Right.
added an element of predictability.
Yeah.
But on the Atari, things are a bit more chaotic.
More random.
Much more random.
Gotcha.
They just kind of appear, so it makes it harder to anticipate their movements.
Yeah.
And it forces you to rely more on your reflexes.
Right. It's interesting how a small change like that
I know.
can really affect how the game feels.
It can. It really highlights the, challenges and creative decisions
Yeah.
involved in porting a game to a different platform.
Totally.
Yeah.
Compromises are sometimes necessary, but the goal is always to maintain that core experience.
Yes.
And capture the essence of the original.
Exactly.
And I think they did a great job in the Atari 2600 version.
I think so, too. It's a fun, engaging experience
Yeah.
that, while different from the arcade,
Mm-hmm.
still captures that spirit.
The spirit of Time Pilot.
The spirit of Time Pilot. And speaking of capturing the spirit,
Yeah.
we can't overlook the sound design on the Atari version
Yes.
because they did such a good job recreating those iconic sound effects.
They did.
Even with the limited audio capabilities of the Atari.
Oh, I know. That engine roar, those laser blasts, and of course those musical chimes.
The chimes.
When you jump through time, they made it in there.
They did.
It's just incredible, Like those simple sound effects
I know.
can really evoke a strong sense of atmosphere and immersion.
Absolutely. Sound design is so important.
It is. It's often the unsung hero.
It is. It really is.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of heroes,
Okay.
the Atari 2600 version had something the arcade didn't.
What's that?
A two-player mode.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't simultaneous, though.
No, it was alternating.
Right. You take turns
You take turns racking up points.
battling through the eras.
Exactly. It was more of a cooperative challenge,
Right.
to see who could survive the longest.
Get the highest score.
You get the highest score, yeah. I can just imagine that just added a whole other layer of fun
Oh, it did.
and competition to the game.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a great example of how developers, even with limited hardware,
Right.
found ways to, enhance the social aspect of gaming.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that gaming is often at its best
Yes.
when shared with others.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up this part of the deep dive,
Okay.
let's talk about something that might seem trivial,
Okay.
but actually played a big role
Okay.
in shaping the player's experience.
What's that?
The title screen.
Oh.
That iconic image of the jet fighter
Yes.
soaring through the sky.
Explosions in the background.
It just perfectly captured the action.
It did.
An adventure that Time Pilot promised.
As like an invitation
It was.
to embark on a thrilling journey through time. And you know what? Even on the Atari, with those limited graphics, they still managed to convey that same sense of excitement.
It's a reminder that good visual design, even back then, was so important to capturing the player's imagination.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in the case of Time Pilot,
Yeah.
that title screen, regardless of platform,
It
it was a powerful symbol
was.
of the time-traveling adventure that awaited.
Yeah.
Huh.
It really is amazing how a single image can, set the stage for a whole gaming experience.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about Time Pilot,
Yeah.
we can't just focus on the technical stuff.
Okay.
I mean, this game really tapped into something deeper,
Oh, okay.
something that resonated with players on a cultural level.
Interesting. Tell me more.
Okay, so think about those time periods they chose to depict.
Yeah.
It wasn't just random.
Right.
It reflected these key moments in aviation and warfare, from those early days of flight to the jet age, and it even kind of touched on those Cold War fears about the future. It's like the game was holding up a mirror to society, showing us our fascination with technology, anxieties about conflict, and, our hopes and fears about what's ahead.
Exactly. And by weaving all those themes into a fun, action-packed arcade experience, they offered something more than just a simple shoot 'em up.
Right.
It gave players a chance to, engage with history, even if it was just through a video game.
So it's like sneaking in a little education with the adrenaline.
Exactly. And that's what great games do.
Yeah.
They entertain us, challenge us, and sometimes they even make us think a bit about the world.
They do. Now, before we wrap up this deep dive, I've got to ask, did you play this back in the day?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Countless hours in those dimly lit arcades.
Oh, wow.
Joystick in hand.
Yeah.
Battling those pixelated biplanes and trying so hard to survive those later levels.
I can picture it.
It was such a rush,
Yeah.
That feeling of maneuvering your jet, dodging the fire, taking down the motherships. It was pure arcade bliss.
And the sound, right.
Oh, yeah.
That engine roar, those explosions.
It was perfect.
Yeah.
It just heightened the intensity so much.
It did.
Made you feel like you were in the cockpit.
It really is amazing how those simple sounds and visuals could really transport you.
It's true. And, Time Pilot may not have the complex stories or fancy graphics of modern games.
Right.
But it had something special.
Well.
Just that pure, unadulterated gameplay. So fun.
And anyone could pick it up and play.
Exactly. Arcade veteran or a newcomer.
Yeah.
Time Pilot offered that challenge and enjoyment.
It did.
Hard to resist, and I think that's why it's still seen as a classic.
Yeah, it really does represent a time when games were all about just pure fun.
Yeah, and it reminds us of those early days of gaming.
Yeah.
When the goal was to survive, rack up those scores, and just have a blast doing it.
So as we power down the time machine and come back to the present, I want to leave you, dear listener, with this thought. Next time you fire up your favorite game, take a moment to appreciate the legacy of these classic arcade games.
Think about how they paved the way for the games we have today.
Yeah.
Those innovative mechanics, those memorable characters, that addictive loop of challenge and reward.
Right.
It all started with games like Time Pilot.
It did. And those early games might seem simple now.
Yeah.
But there's just a magic to them.
There is.
That's so captivating.
Yeah, they remind us of a time when there was so much creativity and experimentation in game design.
Yeah.
And they give us a glimpse into those roots of our modern gaming world.
So go explore those classic arcade games.
Yeah.
You just might rediscover that simple joy of gaming.
You might.
And find yourself transported back to that time when arcades ruled and the future of gaming was just taking off.
Until next time, game on.